at the school early, huh? Or did you just have to?
Well, trying to coordinate with 4 teenagers. Well, they're not, 2 of them are teenagers. But some are going back to school. Catherine, you wanna, or you wanna sit at the table? You could sit right at the table, it's up to you.
Okay.
Wherever you want.
Oh, no, I just want to make sure that
Yes.
people can hear me and see me.
I think they'll be able to.
Okay, here?
Or
Or is it,
it work like that, or no? Guess not, huh?
no?
No,
Well,
people
I guess
can't see
you
it.
can
Maybe
come
down
over.
there.
I didn't know if Nancy was coming in, so.
Maybe down there.
You could sit
Yeah,
there.
Nancy
Okay.
sent a note earlier that she couldn't.
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't see it.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna call the meeting to order. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item number 3, can I get a motion to consider and act upon the minutes of July 10th, 2023?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Is there any discussion on the item?
I'm good.
Nope.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Item number 4, to hear and consider authorizing the purchasing authority to enter into a proposed contract with Gilban Building Company to provide all management services necessary to perform the pre-construction phase of HVAC upgrades at various public schools, as detailed in the RFP 2023-121, in the amount not to exceed $105,700, to provide all necessary services for the construction phase at a fee not to exceed 2.10% of the estimated cost of the work, which shall be converted to a lump sum upon mutual agreement of the project guaranteed maximum price in an amount not to exceed $1,626,990 for construction management general conditions cost based on the 18-month construction schedule. Funding for this contract is available at the account number listed on the agenda for Phase 1 AC at schools, and I see Sal and Angela's both here. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Nancy, second.
Do you want to just quickly run through?
Hello, I'm Sal Morbido. I'm Manager of Construction for the Fairfield Public Schools. The AC project in 3 schools, Phase 1, in our long-term plan is for 3 schools. Urbane Construction was hired through a open public process. The fee percentage was negotiated with the Colliers, our program manager for the project. And this is a necessary step to move forward to get to a guaranteed maximum price on those 3 schools and to get air conditioning into our schools.
Okay. I have questions if nobody
No,
has.
go right ahead. Open it up to the board. Thank you, Sal.
Quick questions. Have we used this, just for the record, have we used this firm before?
Yes, we have. They've been on 4 of our last projects. They did Holland Hill, Mill Hill, Riverfield, Ludlow, the last Ludlow renovation, and did we have those?
And
Yes.
no problems with them, and they always came in on
Great.
or near budget for their piece of work?
Yeah, no, they've maintained the budget.
Okay. And this request, is this within the approved budget that had been put forth for this type of project?
Right now, what we have is pre-construction, so the answer is yes for the pre-construction.
Okay, because the whole thing was done, but is this where it came in versus your estimates? In other words,
We're in the right number for the portion of the work that we're discussing now.
Yeah.
Correct.
So funding is available, you're within the reasonable limits of what you thought you were gonna pay for this work. So we're not already behind the eight ball as it relates to it?
Not for the construction.
Okay. You had referenced the public bid process. Was this, do we have our head of purchasing on?
Yes, I'm here virtually.
Yeah, Adam, can you tell us, did this go through the normal process? Were you part of this, or was this before your time?
No, I was a part of this. This was RFP 2023-121. I believe we received 3 responses, and then the AC Building Committee reviewed this as an RFP panel, and they interviewed 3 firms. Again, as Sal mentioned, when we were ready to make an award to the top choice, our owner's rep negotiated a slightly more advantageous construction management fee. So everything was by the book.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Baldwin, you knew I was coming towards you. Anything to be concerned about in the contract, in the language, any open holes or anything?
Nothing that hasn't been addressed. Adam and I have worked together on this, and I believe that everything is in place.
Okay, and the insurance is in place and all that as well?
The insurance would be sent to purchasing, but I believe that answer is yes.
Is that true, Adam?
So once you guys approve this, we will be requesting their insurance and attaching that as the final piece of the contract document.
So this doesn't go forward unless their insurance is checked, is that right?
Correct. We verify that, yes.
Okay. I'm good for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy?
Yeah, is there any guideline or instruction to pursue renewable energy? More just out of a curiosity, is there guidelines for that?
You're speaking of the design parameters?
Just
We would be looking for energy efficient equipment, not necessarily a renewable source.
okay.
Would dictate, but we obviously would be looking for an efficient design that we can maintain and keep that efficiency going.
Thank you. I don't have additional questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Is there any comments from the public on this item?
Out of curiosity, since Nancy brought it up, is there any plan for renewable energy in public space? Seems like a somewhat appropriate discussion to be having at some point.
Well, I
Can you
mean,
understand my question?
yeah, we could have a
Sorry,
long discussion.
Sorry, who was that
Various
speaking?
things. We have microphones here now.
Yeah, sorry, who was that just spoke?
John Tricostas, my question was, since you brought up the discussion about renewables, I'm wondering, since I don't come to these very often, so I haven't heard all your past discussions, is there anything on, in the near future, or even far future, in public space to bring renewable energy sources to the town?
So we do have solar panels. I'm sure you are aware of those at the high schools. When you drive by, they have the arrays all there for their parking. We have them at the Mill Plain parking lot where our Park and Rec department is. We also included funds in the ARPA, the money that we got from the federal government, to purchase 15 electric cars for our town fleet.
Cool.
If you pulled in, I don't know which way you pulled in, we have the charging stations installed. So that's part of the stuff we're doing. As far as the school system, they would have to speak on what they're doing. I don't know if we are looking to put solar panels on our schools, if we have some items. I mean, as someone who's in the HVAC business myself, geothermal is extraordinarily expensive and like almost cost prohibitively expensive. We have a lot of personally customers who ask about it, and then when they see the price, they back away because it's so expensive.
So we have, in the school system, we have, I believe we have 14 separate PV solar panel systems across the various schools. There's actually multiple at some schools, 3 separate systems at Fairfield Woods, 2 at the high school, each of the high schools, and so on, for almost a total of 1 megawatt of power that's produced fixed costs for 20 years, and we have those. We typically look into opportunities after we replace roofs so that we have a long and viable place for them to be without them creating a problem.
So I just want to mention, and I appreciate you asking the question, but typically public comment is just comment. It's not usually a Q&A, but I thought it was, but you're not aware of that because you probably don't attend meetings that often, but I just want to share that because that's the rules.
So a comment versus a question.
Correct, they're used to comment, public comments, right. Board members can ask questions, but the public can only comment on an item.
Like they like it or?
On a voting item, But you're always free to email or call me or call our selectmen with anything you, or if you have questions more about those sort of things, I'd be happy to share that with you.
Yeah.
I will say that, one of the other things I do is I sit on the board of the Connecticut Green Bank, which is a governmental entity that helps bring renewable energy to the state. It's quasi-governmental. We partner with private financial institutions, and the town of Fairfield is looked at very favorably at being very proactive in their renewable energy. And I do know that they stay in constant contact with organizations like the Green Bank to take advantage of these programs as well as offer them to their residents, which is something that the Green Bank does as well. So, yeah, it's been a focus for the town for many years now in terms of taking advantage of renewable energy where it's possible. And as Mr. Morfito said, where it can go into a project that's just starting. It's a little hard to rip up a roof of a school if it's brand new.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any additional comments on this item from the public? I see the chairwoman of the Board of Ed. I'm assuming she's in favor of this item.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for checking.
All right, back to the board. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jen. Okay, so we have a presentation on item number 5 to hear and discuss. This is not a voting item. This is a courtesy. This is an investigation the town underwent when we discovered an issue that arose in the town, like many issues we found since coming here 4 years ago. And we had asked our HR department to do an investigation into our town-issued credit card purchases. And so our HR director has spent an extraordinary amount of time, in addition to her workload, doing this investigation. So we wanted to have a presentation for the Board of Selectmen as a courtesy. And so I will hand it over to our HR director, Kathleen Simpson.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Kathleen Simpson. I'm HR director. I've been here just past my year anniversary. So I'm very lucky to have a great team and staff and ability to make HR modern and professional and invest. And one of the jobs we have is to investigate alleged employee misconduct. And there is a policy. It's the standard of conduct for municipal fraud policies and procedures. It initially was in place, I believe, in 2009. It's been revised. It's in the investigation under Exhibit 2, and it does require the HR director to conduct investigations of of alleged fraud under that policy. And it's also could involve the county attorney. It could involve the first select person, the chief of police, or the CFO. And I would say this, but when I started, Jared Schmidt was not here today, the CFO, who helped me with the recommendations, which I'll go over at the end of my summary of what was investigated. So on January 6th of 2023 of this year, I met along with Joanne Cordemonch, who's our labor relations specialist. Just as background, Joanne Cordemonch joined us officially in January of 2023 as a labor relations specialist, and is much needed to assist with many things to do with labor relations, including investigations of alleged employee misconduct. So Joanne Cordemonch and I, as one of our first assignments, met with Dana Carey, who is a resident, and also made a FOIA request. And a part of her FOIA request and her findings from the records she obtained had concerns and a complaint about use of the credit cards. And so we met with Ms. Carey, and we learned from, obtained her documentation she had with the credit cards, and they were from May, June, and July, I believe, the 3 months that she was looking at. And yes, there was some things without having any further backup that looked quite concerning to me and Joanne and warranted immediate investigation. So this really was two investigations. One investigation was concerning the superintendent of the WPCF, John Bodie, and his credit card use, because at the same time we were getting this information, there were some concerns about a travel request for out-of-state travel by Mr. Bodie and one of his employees. And I guess prior to that time, there wasn't a lot of travel being done because of COVID. So this request was put into the first Selectwoman's office, which is part of the policy. And it seemed like a large amount of money, so we were asked to look at it. One of the other things we do, which I'm probably adding as a segue, we also are responsible for risk management for the town, which includes things like potential liability with fraud in terms of policies and also investigation with our partners in finance and purchasing. So we did meet, and what we decided to do is to bifurcate the global investigation and parse out the investigation with the superintendent of the WPCF, just because there was such egregiousness from the appearance of what his spending was. On its face, looked so egregious as compared to other credit card holders for that time period that we thought immediate action should be taken based on the seriousness of the allegation. Because it's a high-level position, handles large sums of money, so we made that our priority. That investigation was conducted. We looked at credit card use by Mr. Bodie, but also his predecessor, Mr. Norton, from 2018 to 2022, January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2022, just to see the patterns and what kind of spending was going on, to get a big picture of how this is working. And what we discovered there was a culture, and again, this is not about people or putting flame, it's about systems. And there was a long-term, from what we learned, system, if you will, of using the credit card purchases for food and meals for staff, large, like daily, and it was things like birthday cakes or, Chick-fil-A or that type of thing, almost on a daily basis, in addition to seemingly large amount of money spent for when they traveled for dining and things like that. So what I learned from Mr. Norton and who was working there, he said he started the practice, if you will, of buying meals and food for the workers at the plant to build morale, because he said it's such a hard place to work, and they don't get out like other employees do, public works, because they're stuck there. So as a morale builder, he would purchase food and other types of things for a reward. He also said he bought gift cards, we found, which to kind of give a reward. these things were in violation of the policy. And then looking at when John Bodie took over, he continued the same practice. So looking at that, we concluded I should back up a little bit too. We also did a review of the history of credit card policies and who has credit cards. And there's credit card holders, approximately 96 of the town. I did not look at the Board of Ed, by the way. I didn't look at their credit card use. That was not part of my, task here. When I looked at the credit card policies, and in my report I go through them, there's been different policies for credit card and travel and through the years. And what we did learn since March 14th, 2000, that many of the credit card holders did not have notice of policies or weren't aware. There was no onboarding or here's a credit card, here's training. And that, again, that goes to a system. So we looked at that, and that we took that as mitigation for John Bodie's situation and buying excessive amounts of food, if you will, or travel, rather lavish, because that was a pattern. And he did not have notice of the travel and the meal reimbursement policy, which we did check that had not been disseminated to him. And he said he was just going along with what had been done for years prior. So as mitigation, we had him, we did a written warning, and he did get payback approximately $800 worth of the use. It wasn't usually amount of money, the food. I want to give you the impression that it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was under $4,000 after 4 years, what we looked at of the kind of food that was being bought. The other thing I should mention is under the Public Works contract, they do have meal money, and there is a system for meal reimbursement, but for mostly with emergencies for snow plowing, so they can stop at 2 diners or Bud's Deli, I believe that we have a contract with, and they can give a meal ticket and get their meal paid for. It gets invoiced. Because the treatment plant workers are stuck in there, and they particularly were stuck through COVID, through lunches and things. They're trapped. So they were bringing food in for them. So that was completed in April. And then we still were working on the global. My staff, Joanne Portamonch, and I'm also pleased to say that we have Ivana Ventoyak, who's our HR paralegal. She started in December. She does FOIA for us and helps with investigations. Both of them were going through these credit cards, which is a lot of records. There are reconciliation packages that are required, which has basically that you have to put in your reconciliation form, what you purchased with the credit card, and you're supposed to put why and the amount, and put a justification of what business-related purpose was it for. And so going through those and the receipts and going through them takes a lot of work. So they were doing a lot of that in the meantime, going through those records. We also, Joanne Cordemonch put together a survey for credit card holders and department heads of credit card holders and themselves, asking them, one of the questions is it really necessary for you to have a credit card? And the responses we received were everyone answered yes, or those you supervise to have a credit card. And they would give different reasons why. Another question was about notice. Were they aware of policies, that type of training? And are they aware of other purchasing alternatives? And we learned from this survey that a lot of the department heads were really unclear or weren't sure if there's other ways and didn't have a good handle of purchasing policies and procurement. So in February of 2023, we did a training, and I should back up again. Ms. Saxwell before I get here, I should probably go back, and I apologize. Part of our review, I also looked at there was an audit done of credit card use in February of 2020, and it looked back for the internal audit. It covered March 2019 through October 2019. And it looked at credit card use, and this was done by the Senior Internal Auditor Project Manager, which is the title for the current internal auditor right now. And from that review of that audit, the auditor from that made a recommendation to do some training. And what finance did, and I don't want to make it about a person, they sent an email in January of 2021 with a refresher about credit card use and how, do's and don'ts and general takeaways. They did not include the out-of-state travel policy or the meal reimbursement limit in that notice. So some of the credit card holders still weren't aware of that. And there was no formal training. It was just an email, and credit card holders were required to return a statement, an MOU, if you will, memorandum of understanding that they received the policy. And that went back to, I believe, the purchasing director at the time, Gerald Foley. So that clearly wasn't enough, that refresher, from what we saw. So then we started doing this investigation. The CFO, along with the administration, thought it would be a good idea, okay, we better send reminders again in January 2023 of the policies, of what's required, and also let's include that out-of-state travel policy and the meal levels, meal money levels that you can charge for food as part of travel or meetings. Like I said, fast forward again, we realized that there still needed to have more teeth to it. We needed more one-on-one training for department heads and to make sure that they're following the rules, making sure they're really looking at what those they supervise are purchasing, and also department heads making sure they're giving their information for review, their packages to the CFO, because that wasn't necessarily happening either. So all new, people are trying to get these policies. We don't have an employee handbook. We didn't have onboarding to give people policies. When people got credit cards or became supervisors, it was clear they weren't getting the training or the information about purchasing practices. And again, it's a system, it's about people, it's about the system. So, okay. So also part of our investigation, we didn't want to wait till the end of the investigation to start taking remedial action, because of course that doesn't make any sense. So going through the other credit card holders in more detail, what we did is we pulled different months, primarily at the beginning of the end of the fiscal year and right around the beginning of an actual calendar year. A lot of spending might happen before a fiscal year, a lot of spending might happen around the holidays. So we kind of wanted to look at that. So we concentrated on those records, reconciliation packages from 2018 to 2022 to look at samples and see what we found for all the credit card holders. Once we got there, we narrowed it down. Those who did not provide clear justification as required, we called those departments out, those credit card holders out. And we said, let's go make them follow up and ask them for their justification. What was the business purpose for why you purchased these items? So the ones that stood out, that needed that further information, were listed in their report and in my report. And what we did for union members, because they do have rights under their contracts and under labor laws for due process rights or maybe a right to union representation, we decided to do questionnaires. We worked with union leadership, and we decided a questionnaire for those that we want more information made sense. And what some of the union leadership, police and fire, asked, can you please give them a garrity warning? And for those who don't know what a garrity warning is, that's a warning you put on to an employee saying, if we find that we're doing an investigation, you are directed to answer the questions. If we find there's a criminal component to this, the deal is we're not going to share it with the prosecutor or with law enforcement. Doesn't mean the rest of it doesn't mean you're off the hook, but we won't share your answer. And that's by law, that we have to do that with public employees. So that took a little bit of time to do that. We got that back. We got the questionnaires back. I did ask people to go back to 2018. Not easy for everybody to do that, but they did the best they could. They gave answers. They followed up with it. And what we found, we didn't find any evidence of any defrauding the public. And if I thought for 1 second there was any type of fraud, I would have been obligated to refer that to probably in this case, not the Fairfield Police Department, because they also were under investigation too with their credit card. But probably have to get a law enforcement agency to look at that if there was rampant fraud. There were violations, such as some people were having sales tax, not realizing that we're tax exempt in Fairfield. Some were, there was an instance where I found that, and also Ms. Carey also pointed out, where a staff member and engineer was buying over-the-counter medication to use in the field, thinking that was okay, and for a number of reasons it's not. It wasn't a lot of money. It was to the tune of maybe $14, but it's still wrong is wrong, right? You're not supposed to buy the medication. And for two reasons: risk management. We don't want to be handing out medication that has bad side effects, including drowsiness on the job. And also, it is against the policy. It's considered personal use. And talking it completely unaware, thought it was okay because thought it was part of the first aid, because we have a first aid kit that includes Tylenol and other ointments and that type of thing in our first aid kit. The same, we also found that one of the employees had purchased running shoes, but he used the town credit card Amazon account, but he used his own personal credit card to purchase the running shoes. And he was told, absolutely, you cannot use the town Amazon account to make personal purchases, as it's still not your account. We pay for that Amazon Prime. So that was addressed. That was probably one of the more egregious ones out of everything here. And it wasn't so egregious that someone needed to be terminated or arrested or, referred to the police. And again, lack of training, lack of, and also too, in fairness, the department heads get a lot of emails. They have a lot of responsibilities. And a few of them said, look, I see the email, maybe I read it, but I, just trying to remember it like rote every day and what I can and can't do. And if you're not getting things sent back, hey, look, you got sales tax here, or you're not, that type of thing, you're not going to be aware of it. So going back, and again, I am not here to say, hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? If people are going to look at this report and rip it apart too, I'm sure there's things I could do better. But the audit that was done for the 2019 credit card purchases, and when I looked at this, it lacked some things. It lacked who, what, where, how, and why. There's no specific areas to say, why was this, where do we really have a problem? Not because we want to get people in trouble, because we want to correct it. So there wasn't any, it was very broad. So for instance, in 2019, looking at the 2019 credit card use, a WPCF, right there, red flag, that would have been one to say, hey, look, we're going to identify the problem areas so we can go and tell department heads or the credit card holders, this is a problem. And if it is something that's fraud, we better want to nip it right away in the bud. I mean, never mind, just the seriousness of that. So my thought is that maybe that if this would have been identified more, where the problem areas were by the individual departments or a credit card holder, we could have probably staved off, ongoing liability at that point. Again, it's important to have that identified areas. The other issue with that report, the audit report, at the time, there was an interim CFO. So there was transition going on, and I understand that. Of course, we had COVID. So that report that was provided from the auditor to the interim CFO at the time, and it was provided to the director of purchasing at the time, Gerald Foley, did not send that report forward to the first selectwoman to the CAO, to chief of staff, or to HR, or to the town attorney, or anyone else who could perhaps take action or should be taking action. You may say, well, why HR? Well, it's risk management. If there's a problem with liability policy, HR should be involved. And also HR should be, if there should be disciplinary action being taken, corrective action, that should go to HR as well. Obviously, CAO for operations. You need to know if there's a problem with some credit card or purchasing, that needs to be addressed immediately and get that resolved. Obviously, the first selectwoman should have knowledge if there's of audits, particularly if there's like serious problems like this or potential for fraud, and or the chief of staff, but someone in the administration. So, looking at that audit didn't get, didn't have legs that it needed to have. So, that, in my view, was part of the problem. Again, communication and notice. And trust me, HR is part of that too, with policies. So we were, if we're looking at not giving employees the information they need and making sure we have the right oversight. So going from there, when I looked at all of these things and going through the report, another thing that stood out on me, and again, I keep on saying this, but I do mean this. I'm talking about systems, not people. The senior internal auditor project manager is also a union president. And there's nothing wrong with being in the union if you're an auditor. That's fine. The police have an investigator in internal affairs that's in the union, but also investigates employee misconduct, police misconduct. So you can do both roles. The problem is that if you're the union president, you also are responsible for advocating and representing employees who maybe potentially be disciplined. And you're also, if you're investigating the very same people you represent, that poses, in my view, a conflict of interest. And it also may make you maybe unconsciously unable to, do an investigation without a bias, knowing that you're an elected president and these are the very same people who put you in that position. And no fault of saying, again, this was allowed, this came out before this wasn't, no one probably thought of it even. And it came to my attention when I thought it was problematic when Mr. Bodie was being investigated. We had to have a meeting with him and due process rights, and the very person who audited him was also representing and advocating for him, kind of putting holes in the very policy. So it was a little, it just was something that maybe to think about that needs to change. The other thing that came across too is that the job of senior auditor and a project manager is not sustainable. And I thought it was important to point that out because there was a very good question that Laura Charlton had posed about why isn't the auditor doing enough audits? She doesn't have enough time. She's assigned all these other things and, capital projects and project management that really don't go in the auditing space. And what I learned from my review is that that position was given a stipend by Bob Mayer, and that occurred, and I apologize, I have this right handy, that occurred in August 2013. And they added duties which are really, in my view, go under a CFO position, more space. And maybe back then there wasn't as much work as there is now, and I don't know. And again, I'm not here to criticize. I'm just noticing that that's what happened. Then in August 2019, Emmett Hipson, the HR director, and the union president and senior internal auditor worked a deal together with the union to create the position of senior internal auditor project manager, putting all those duties together, which again, really the duties of two people. So there is a very good reason why, that the senior auditor could not get to as many audits as town would like her to have be conducted. So Mr. Schmidt, the CFO, Jared Schmidt, was looking at these duties. He did take quite a few away when he became the CFO And he also obtained a position, financial analyst manager, that's going to be doing a lot of the duties that were put in that senior auditor project manager role. And that person's starting in September. So that will be going to alleviate for the auditor to be able to go back to auditing. And I believe Mr. Schmidt told me he assigned the auditor to do 15 audits for the fiscal year, and that's going to start. And the other piece that Jared would like to see too, as the CFO, is have quarterly audits of the credit card use. They're random, pick departments or take a percentage and look at them and make sure that make sure it's a thorough audit, and make sure if there are problems, identify those and address them immediately. And if there's need for law enforcement or, disciplinary action or some other action, we can take right there, nip it in the bud. But also, if someone made a mistake, we can catch it quickly. So we've done so much training. We rolled out another training July 17th before this was finished. Again, because we really wanted to make sure people understood, and we did a review again of the credit cards, and part and parcel because of a FOIA request made about looking at them for Ms. Carey. And when we looked at that, we're like, people have improved, but there's still room for improvement. So let's do another comprehensive rollout, and we'll give more teeth to the policy, make sure people understand the consequences, incorporate the technology policy, because that's important about buying software, you really need to you've got to go through IT, making sure that you're not putting things in our system that would corrupt the system or compromise cybersecurity, making sure that department heads and card holders attest that they are not, we have an attestation now, that they are not, that the purchases were made for a legitimate town business, and they didn't violate the purchasing policies, that there weren't alternative means, that they're not trying to violate purchasing policies. That's in there now.
Point of information, perhaps, but perhaps we could take pause and have you answer some questions, because there's a lot of information you've thrown at us, and it's raising more questions for me than providing answers. So
Nancy, I asked Kathleen to go through her whole presentation because I want it completely presented, because I think that's important, and then we'll go to the board and open it up for questions after that.
And I'll just state for the record, as I had said, I have to leave because of a personal family emergency that's come up for 6 o'clock. So I hope to have ample time to be able to ask the many important questions I have, but I will just state for the record that there is a lot of really confusing information that's coming out as a result of this presentation, and it may be more clarifying, but I defer, obviously it's your meeting, but I'll just state that for the record that I've requested to stop at this point to ask questions.
Well, actually, I appreciate that. I have to actually, I have a hard stop at 5:45 because I do have another meeting. And this is a courtesy to the Board of Selectmen. This is not the only time that we can discuss this. We can obviously, discuss this at a future meeting as well. So this is not, it's not like an only one-time opportunity to have this discussion. So I just want you to be aware that I'm not going to cut your ability off to be able to include this in future agendas. I want Kathleen to finish her presentation because, again, she worked really hard on this, put thousands of hours into this, and I appreciated it because it's just one of many things that needed to be changed and fixed in our town government that was broken from before. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like her to finish, and then I will open it up. Go ahead, Kathleen.
I will try to be more clear. There is a lot of things in here, but so we didn't, in a nutshell, we did not find any fraud, which is good news. It was not fraud. We did find that what I said, that the credit card auditor's report for the March 2019 to October 2019 was not shared with the important people on the administration. The audit didn't include specific findings, contained general and broad information, and that to me, broad things are fine. That I'm finding the same thing, but if you don't know specifically where the problems are, and the administration doesn't know, it's not going to get corrected. We do realize that we need more audits, and that the person in the current position cannot sustain the position of having this dual role of the project management and audit. So that was another finding, obviously. And then the conflict of interest with being a union president and also being the internal auditor, for the reasons I stated, the credit card policies and procedures that have been in place, and the notice needs to keep being promulgated through onboarding, through training, and that's going to continue to go on with the employee handbook. And when we looked at recommendations, because Jared Schmidt and I thought it was important to make recommendations as a result of this together, we put them together, and in addition to the training we're doing, what I just said, continuing that type of communication more clearly and making sure people have it, making sure things are addressed. Part of onboarding, HR has got to, in addition to the many policies, there's many, many policies we're creating, revising, and trying to get to employees. I came in here, there's really not a lot of policies. It's lacking, and we're getting there. We got to chunk it out, but it's really important to get the policies together, including the credit card. And we also, for HR, we recommend that we look at the senior internal auditor project manager position to look about the duties and how to perhaps revise that position. It's already being done with the duties being taken away, but clearly that auditing position really needs to be first and foremost. And then looking also at how do we deal with this potential conflict of interest. And for finance, doing regular audits, quarterly audits to look at credit card use and make sure they're thorough. And also, Mr. Schmidt said that the person who's taking over that position in September perhaps could assist with that. Audit who has credit cards, determine whether the number of cards issued is necessary. We have the survey. Now we got to dive deeper as a result of this. Review and analysis of inventory and purchased equipment and goods. One of the things that I learned, for the survey, some department heads have a way of inventorying equipment they purchase, whether credit cards or otherwise. Some do not. That is something that needs to be, in the long term, needs to be addressed. We should have an inventory of where things are and making sure that they're where they're supposed to be. And if someone buys something, we want to make sure if we go into, the closet, it's there. And then expand review of all audit reports to Human Resources, the Town Attorney, CAO, and the First Select Woman were our recommendations. And I just wanted to speak quickly about the time it took to do this investigation. It actually was 6 months. It started in January. I did complete it at the end of July in terms of getting this documentation together. A lot of it had to be redacted, too, because of account numbers. And these are the exhibits here there's an incredible amount of work to go through and also organize. And not that I'm complaining you have to do that, but I also wanted, it's also the redacting, and you can't, because you're copying receipts, and they're a little paper, you gotta take one out each individually. So again, it's just the nature of the work that had to be done. But I would also say that when we had the two investigations, my focus was on the superintendent, the WPCF. That one took the primary focus. The global one was important, but I wanted to focus on that one, which also included a lot of the work that went into the global. So not that we were ignoring the global, but my focus as the HR director had to be on getting that one completed immediately. And that also included a review by the Fairfield Police Department. When that was released in April to the Board of Finance members, WPCA, as well as the Board of Selectmen. So carrying on from there, finishing this piece up, the investigation also, you had to take into account one of the reasons, like, why weren't you giving out this information as you go along? Because we can't compromise the investigation here by giving out information that could, maybe people who are doing wrong could cover up, or I also have to be mindful of defaming employees. If they didn't do anything wrong, and workplace gossip, that's a very serious thing to say you committed fraud. And so there's also rights under, as union employees, sure appreciate, and you can't violate those rights without ensuring there's union representation and, if necessary, the guarantee warning. And if there's going to be discipline, you have to have a due process hearing. I had to work very closely with the unions and making sure that, that took time. And then the other piece that and again, not excuse or reason, we were going under renovations, serious renovations during this time period. We had to clean up our data. We had to move temporary space. We had to then move back. And that also took an incredible amount of time away from a lot of our duties. I basically put an event between 50 and 60 hours a week. Not complaining. I love this job. I'm very honored to have it. But there was a lot of balls in the air. I also, at the time, when we got this investigation, I just started onboarding my team. Everyone's pretty much new and trying to get used to it and trying to learn and get up to speed. We've made a lot of strides. Obviously, we have a lot more to go. But these are some of the reasons. If I had nothing else going on, or very little, or I didn't care about other things, I probably could have done this 3-4 months, and again, there's a lot more I probably could have done. Hindsight, I could have probably gone on for years going through things and every single document, but I really wasn't finding any serious misconduct here.
Do you have anything?
And I also want to say that I was giving as much information as I could to the Board of Selectmen, to the WPCA with John Bodie, and also with the Board of Finance. I have at Exhibit 17 of hundreds of emails, sharing as much information as I could without compromising the investigation. I had lots of phone conversations with John Mottola, even recently, about this, as much as I could tell him. I don't mind it. I think it's very important, and I think it's refreshing. I live in Bridgeport, that people care so much passionately about their government and accountability, and I do too. That's why I'm here. And I am very happy to work with the team, this administration, that supports that. And I have to say that the policies have not been ignored or abused without consequence. I can't share with you, because they're foiable, but we've done a lot of investigations of employee misconduct, including this one, which have led to discipline or termination, or people leaving on their own accord. We have not been allowing people to use equipment or violate policy without consequence. However, I can't take corrective action if I, and go overboard and violate people's due process rights or defame them. No one in the administration asked for me to share my investigation. Most of the people that I'm one of the, most department heads have credit cards. I don't. Mr. Bremer doesn't. So I had to be very careful because most of all the department heads were mostly investigated are credit card holders. So no one tried to influence me on the investigation. The one thing that I did get a lot was, can you please get this done? You need to get this done. It's really important, which I agree. And I try to go as fast as I can to get that, because it is very important to get this done. But I didn't want to do it fast, I wanted to do it right. And what prompted the investigation was, yes, the FOIA request, which was a complaint. It was, but also under the Code of Conduct policy, HR is mandated to do investigations of fraud and also mandated not to keep it confidential until it's complete. So that, I just wanted to add that too, as far as, and again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Kathleen. So, before I open this up to the board, I think this has somewhat turned into a sort of political football. And unfortunately, a post that was sent to me from a member of our board, guess, sort of taking pot shots at the administration and saying, we're not doing our job, we're not investigating things appropriately, broken promises, and a whole bunch of misinformation. And, I have to say, I'm extraordinarily disappointed in that, because I took over a town that was literally mired in the worst public corruption scandal in Fairfield's history. And I grew up here, and so did 3 generations of my family. And so I take exception to a member of this board not being upfront and speaking these words during a meeting, as opposed to posting things on social media, which seems to be how it works now. People attack each other on social media instead of having real conversations and being genuine. So I am disappointed in that. As soon as we found out there may have been a problem in this area, and just to be real clear here, this report that was done in February of 20, I came into office November 25th of 2019. I had to fire the CFO, who was subsequently arrested. I fired the HR director, who was also arrested. I had another employee who was in charge of a department arrested. I had an interim budget CFO helping me with my first budget in March of 20, apparently 1 month after this report came out that I was never given a copy of. What happened in March of 20? A global pandemic. So there was a lot going on around here. The day I walked into office, when I was sworn in, there were letters of notices of violation from the Department of Environmental Protection dated certified mail of October that were not opened. I was up at the DEEP headquarters 2 weeks into my term, answering a lot of questions from them about why the town was not cooperating with them regarding the contamination spread throughout our town. So our hands were a bit full around here, trying to clean up that mess, the Penfield mess, and then the complete and utter lack of oversight or management of any kind of this town. So to have an honest discussion about working together as Fairfielders, caring about our community, caring about that our government runs appropriately, should matter to all of us and should not be used for political potshots. Because I did not create the policies of this government. I walked into no policies, no procedures, no training for any of the 500 employees or 18 departments that the first select person is responsible for. So I wanted to just start off by saying that. I want to thank Kathleen for her hard work on this. Her department is underwater, basically. I don't think people realize that HR departments do a lot of work. And before I became the leader of a municipal government, I didn't realize how much work they do. And frankly, it was an understaffed department for many years. I think it is the most professionally staffed department this town has ever had in our HR department. We have an actual attorney who is the HR director. We have a assistant HR director now. We have a benefits manager who actually has real experience in that field. We have a labor relations specialist, and we have 2 other staff members. And their hands are full. They work really hard. There is nonstop flow in that office, nonstop, all kinds of things going on. But at any rate, I do want to thank them, and I know they were, as Kathleen mentioned, prodded quite a bit, asking for them to hurry it up. But, having it fast is not always getting it right. And I appreciate Kathleen making sure that she got it right. We have put in now policies, which I'm actually proud about, to teach our employees who never got any training ever about any of this stuff. And that we have real credit card use policies and trainings, which we were never given. Can you imagine? So, this has been a great learning experience. I'm glad we went through this process. I'm glad we learned these things. And I'm glad that our employees know what the proper protocols are now. And it's all about fixing things. So when you walk in and you have all of these problems, hundreds of problems, you've got to pick and choose which one you're going to really focus on, fix it, and move on to the next. And when you have so many of them, trust me, there are a lot of them. You do your best. So I'm really glad. This was good. This was, to me, a good process. And I was glad to hear, actually, that we didn't have a widespread fraud in this area of our credit card policy. Aside from the fact that we had a lot of public corruption going on in town government, this wasn't really an area where it was happening. So I'm glad we did this exercise. We learned how to tighten our controls and do a much better job than was done before in the past. And now I will open it up to the board. Go ahead, Nancy.
So I'll start by saying how proud I am to work for the citizens of Fairfield, to interrogate processes, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and challenge the status quo. This administration has been in office for almost 4 years now. So while we can all appreciate history and what has been inherited, I find the excuse of having inherited these problems at this point really unfair to the citizens of Fairfield. I have a lot of questions from the presentation. Thank you, Ms. Simpson, for making it, but unfortunately for me, it did not answer a lot of the questions that I have. As the minority select woman, often I found myself in a position just to simply raise questions so that I can raise awareness, so that the public can do their due diligence to understand what's been going on. And so I see that as my role today. A few things. I will start by saying that receiving 1,000 pages of backup material for a meeting on Monday, to receive that material at 4:30 on a Friday is actually quite offensive. It's not the actions of an administration or a group of people who are really interested in informed discussion. To me, it's a fire hose. It's designed seemingly, and I'm not going to assign intent, but it seemingly seems to be an approach that is designed to confuse, obfuscate, deflect, and overwhelm. And in fact, somewhat of the presentation today, I feel follows suit. As I said, I have a lot of questions, and today, since we do have a hard stop time, I will almost pose them rhetorically with the hope that they are revealed later, either as part of a review through the Board of Finance or at another discussion around this table.
Just point of order. Again, this is not a voting item. This was a courtesy presentation to the board about an investigation that the town of Fairfield conducted for itself. And so again, I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that I welcome additional feedback at future meetings of the Board of Selectmen. So to say we dumped 1,000 pages on you to confuse is a little disingenuous, because it's not to confuse anybody. It was finished, we presented it. It is online, and we can speak about it as many times as you'd like going forward. So no one's trying to play anybody here. There's no gotcha going on. It was a report. It was a well-done report, and it has a lot of pages to it. We apologize if it's a lot. But this is not, no one's asking you to
I'm busy right now.
This is a discussion. This is a discussion. And we can discuss it. We can put it on every single agenda, if you'd like, going forward.
So,
So,
are you finished? Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
yes, proceed.
What I would say is not a courtesy. I would actually argue that it is an obligation that we owe as elected officials, and you as the senior elected to give to our residents and to the people of the town. I would say that language here and semantics are really important, starting with something you said, Brenda, Madam First Selectwoman, out of the gate, that we discovered. I think it's really important that narrative, that we don't dig into that narrative, because the truth is this investigation, subsequent audits that happened around credit card use, misuse, and fraud, and they are abuse, misuse, and fraud are three different things. And so we need to talk about them with the correct language. But the administration didn't discover. What happened is a private citizen came forward because she was concerned that policies weren't being adhered to. And so that's what launched, my understanding, and as it was relayed today, launched the subsequent investigation. And I think that poses the question, why did it take that? Almost 4 years, 3 years at the time into the administration, why did it take a private citizen coming forward? And what other areas?
It was partial, Nancy. So as was in the report, I noticed an irregularity in the travel document I had to sign off on. Subsequently, Ms. Carey, who was also the one who uncovered the fill pile situation, reached out, and I welcomed her. I said, please come in. What are you finding? Because, yes, when she did come in, no, we were not looking at credit card policy. We had our hands full with fraud and corruption in every form that you can imagine throughout the town government. Add in the pandemic, which was a year-long process. So no one was trying to not take care of a matter, and we actually appreciated Mrs. Carey coming in, very much so.
My, again, understanding is that digging into the weeds on this, the information, there were delays in giving information and sharing information. Information that was shared was partial. What I would say is, Ms. Simpson, you referred to not focusing on individuals, and yet several times throughout this presentation, I heard a lot of deflection of blame on individuals. So I think that if we're truly looking at systems, again, semantics matter here, then we need to look at those systems. So that's important. But I guess some of the outstanding questions, and then Tom, if you have some things and I can keep going, the questions that remain, first of all, in terms of a professionalized audit or information that would feel readable, it may be as a courtesy to the community, and people aren't going to read through thousands of pages of an information dump. Top line summary of what the findings are, what metrics were used. Was this a random selection? Ms. Simpson, you said you focused on one employee in particular. It'd be really good to understand, was it really thousands of hours as was suggested? And I think understanding what you look back at, time frame, and a real summary, a top line 2-page, 3-page summary of what's in that 1,000 pages would be really helpful. I think it would be important to understand, to get an explanation of the specific nature of the policy violations that you've discovered and uncovered. If not fraud, then what is it that really we're talking about? You said, I think you said, unless I misheard, that some of this was FOIable, but then you said you couldn't share. So I just would want to understand then, if you can share it, if it is public information, then we should be entitled to it without having to FOIA it. And given the nature that FOIA has played in this process, it really now leads me to think back to our discussion about charging money for FOIA for materials, and I just think it's something that we need to think about moving forward. Were you able?
I wanted to mention. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to, but I want to talk about the FOIA. I didn't say this wasn't FOIAble. This is all public information now. When you were having discussions with me, I told you that I could not compromise the investigation per the policy, and also give out information because you don't want to upset the integrity of the investigation. All of this is FOIAble. I would never suggest that this information should not be public or not be shared with the public.
Okay,
I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. You had said that, you know, the consequences and that personnel, it didn't go without consequence. So I think that would be important to understand. Were you,
I didn't
for
say,
instance,
I said that. No, I did. Okay, I won't argue, but that's okay. But I didn't say that.
Okay.
You're saying one of the things that I said that I did not say. I just want to make it clear. Okay.
Then that may be the case.
My integrity at issue here. So.
No, I appreciate that. So then the question will come to bear, and I'm not asking, it's more rhetorical for the time being, because I would like to get through the other questions that I have that ultimately I hope we'll get the answers to. If then it is FOIAble and it is public information, it would be good to hear what some of those consequences have been. I'd like to understand, and I think the public should be able to have a sense of if you were able to quantify any financial loss associated with policy violations. And then what, and I'm going from my notes here, what were those actions taken? Going back to what the previous question, what were those actions taken? And if it didn't rise to a high level, then what were those repercussions, and how were they, what was the metric for what the level of the repercussions should be? I'm going to pause here. Yeah, I was just going to say I'll pause because, no, I think it's important to just get whatever questions remain.
Well, for the record, you misunderstood my presentation. I didn't say those things. And I also...
What things?
I did not say that. I talked about, in general, we've done employee investigations, and there has been consequences when we find violations of policy. And it doesn't always mean discipline or arrest or terminating people. It is involved with either training or counseling. And then you were very aware of a repercussion because you had the findings of fact, and you shared the stipulated agreement with Mr. Bodie that he had to repay money, and he also got a written warning. And that happened in April.
He was on paid administrative leave.
And he was on paid administrative leave as well when we were investigating him. I didn't focus on one employee. I think what you misunderstood is that I had to make a priority with focusing more on him first and having my staff looking at the other records because that was the most glaring one. So I just want to make sure that's clear. I didn't focus on one person and ignore other people.
I hope I didn't misrepresent that because I am asking more broadly what disciplinary actions may have been taken as a result of some violations. So,
and I also want to make it clear for the record that I don't obfuscate or delay or do dilatory tactics. I'm an attorney in good standing. I take my reputation, my credibility very seriously, and the implication that somehow that I did something to throw obstacles or do something improper and unethical, I do take very seriously, and I take great exception to it.
And to be clear, what I had suggested was the delivery of the material Friday at 4:30 was what was concerning, not the material itself, not any delays that I did not point a specific finger at your integrity. What I was suggesting is that getting 1,000 pages of material that we needed to review in the time frame that we did is what had the appearance of it. So I also want to be clear because, as I said, semantics really do matter. So, and I do want to have to make sure that in the record, and I'll ask that this is noted about in terms of the questions, and I can be really succinct with some of the questions that I do have that I hope will be written into the minutes. The question about the length of what did take so long, if you're spending 50 hours, as you suggested, 50, 60, I think was the number, not quoting it. It was suggested over 6 months. each week, 24 weeks times 50 hours, it would be great to understand really what that process was.
I didn't do 50 hours on this investigation. I have a lot of other duties like contract negotiations. I have other investigations. I didn't spend 50 hours a week just on this, just to be clear.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, no, presumably, the thousands of hours that were referred to, it would just be great to understand, again, the metrics used, the process, what actually happened. So there's that. I'd like to also ask the question for the record, what did this investigation uncover that is different from the audit that was done in 2020 specifically? And again, perhaps these are things for a cover sheet. I do know that you touched on that a little bit, but it'd be good to parse that out. The financial implications to the town as a result of any misuse or abuse. You've clarified that there was not fraud. You didn't find, at least in this instance. And then the other question remains that, is the town investigating or looking at, there have been a number of other audits, and will you be looking with the same intention across the other departments, for instance, bidding and purchasing and financial controls? Because to me, while it may not be about a single person, what this really does highlight is a failure in financial controls across systems. So it'd be good to understand what's going to be done or what has been done with regards to the past audits that have been done. So for now, I would like just to pause to see if Tom has any reaction to this, and I'm just going over my notes based on your presentation.
Thank you. Tom?
Thank you, Nancy. Mrs. Simpson, thank you for all the work you did. It's painstaking. I know, I've been there. By way of background, I've been a financial executive, I'm old, about 30 years as CFO, and what I do is I go into these companies that are having problems like this, and I take over and do investigations like this, and ferret out this kind of stuff. So I understand what you've gone through a bit. So thank you for the work. I have some observations, having read your report, having listened to you today, and I wrote them down, and I just want to go through them one by one. The first one is, and I want to be clear, I think what you're saying is, I haven't found any real evidence of fraud. I have found evidence because of a lack of knowledge of employees of misuse and abuse of the credit cards.
I think abuse, I don't know. I think that there's been some violations, like minor ones, de minimis, that like the sales tax, and things like sloppy, like not a mistake happened, no one paying attention, paying more attention, and they're not like large ticket items, luckily, but it can happen. And I also think a lot of the other things I would say, if you want to talk about a violation of the policy, was the failure to put a justification. Right. And that's really important, because once you put the justification in, then you're like, oh, okay, now I know why. I hate to use the health department, why they had to get a hotel room at Circle Inn. Like, what's going on there? Well, they had to evict someone, and they had to put them up because of a health issue. Right. So, I mean, and if you don't have that, of course your hair will go on fire, to see that.
That raises something I'll bring back later in my point, but that's a good example, except the hair on fire. Good example. The policies obviously then were not followed in many instances, is what you were finding.
Yes, that's correct.
I think Nancy asked this question, and I think it's very relevant. In the terms of your investigation, what was the total financial impact of these kind of, for lack of a better word, improprieties?
Well, that is a good question. I did not focus on amounts, because I would say that I do know with the case of the superintendent what the amount was, and the restitution was made. So that one we have. The little ones with adding up all the sales tax and adding up, the little, like the over-the-counter medication for $14, I did not add those up.
could you just have somebody take a look at it? And by the way, it's okay to say,
Yeah.
we're talking $20,000
Yeah, yeah.
or we're talking $50,000. You don't have to say we're talking 50 to 900.
Oh, yeah, no, I get it. I don't
Okay.
think we're talking even thousands with it. I just don't believe that, but
Here's the other thing
that's
that
right.
came out. Here's the other thing that came out, and I'm going to be careful the way I say this, but I do somewhat, just based on your discussion, feel badly. Mr. Bodie, he had to make restitution of $800.
approximately, yeah.
Right, what was that $800 related to, just so that I know? You don't have to give me, was it personal expenses, or was it stuff like meals that he bought, things like that?
It was meals he bought, but it was
Okay.
more a personal nature, for instance, that he could not justify. And I have the list right here, I had it
Okay.
handy. And it was excessively
Okay.
high.
Because my question here is, has anybody else been forced to make restitution?
With my investigation, no. When there were no mistakes, they have been. Like, I know that someone bought a meal for a volunteer, and they offered to make restitution. They said they didn't know that they couldn't buy a meal for a volunteer, little things like that. The staff who bought the medication over the counter
Right.
was not forced to make restitution,
Right.
but was told this is not proper.
Yeah, I'm just concerned,
Yeah.
do we have a dual standard there of making
Fair
somebody,
enough, yeah.
Make restitution, and then
Right.
somebody else who did something similar? Because,
Yeah.
and you, by the way, it could be just, I heard what you said,
Mhm.
was, hey, Mr. Bodie was just continuing past practices
Right.
that he inherited. If that's true, it's hard to hold him accountable if they were just past practices and he wasn't, to your point, aware of what the policy was. Because in that instance, and forgive me for the way I say this, the town failed Mr. Bodie because we gave him the position and didn't train him appropriately. And then you therefore can't hold him to a standard, particularly if it's a higher standard than you're holding anybody else to.
That's a good point, and I think I can clarify that for you. The practice of buying the cakes and things like
Yeah.
that, the goodies and the things, the meals, that he was, technically it was a violation of policy, but he wasn't responsible. It was excessive dinners that he went out, for instance, I believe it was one at Archie Moore's. It was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was over $100.
Okay.
That is not a culture and a practice. There was one for, I think a yoga chair, something to, equipment for helping it back. So it was that type that went from a detour from what Bill Norton started with the buying things for the workers.
So I think the bottom
That's
line
fair.
of what Mr. Flynn
Yeah.
is saying, and I
Yeah.
don't think we need to be getting
Yeah.
into this level of
Right.
Right.
discussion about someone, but, and the restitution has been made. So again, there weren't policies really strong, there was loose policies in place before I came in, but they were never trained, there was no training, there was no,
That's the bigger issue.
and so this actually was a good thing, because we were able to write more stringent policies, and then be in a room with all the department heads, because we meet in here very regularly with department head meetings, which didn't take place before either.
Right.
And explain to all the department heads, hey, this is what the policy is now,
Right.
this is what you need, and they liked it. They asked questions, they engaged, HR answered them, and then we started doing trainings with everybody who has one. So it's been, and I see what you're saying about the, why should someone have to pay back $800, but the guy who bought,
I just wanna
allergy
be fair.
pills
Right.
didn't have to pay back the $14. Right, okay, that's a fair point. And
It's also, his name has been out there as of having done this, and that's wrong.
Well, it's unfortunate, because there was, I think, listen, it wasn't our choice to be publicly defaming any employee in this town. There was a lot of chatter going on, and a lot of what's going on, pushing, and so, that's unfortunate, because that is someone's life, and it's personnel matters, and again, having these discussions offline as opposed to in public, I think are more appropriate, but we were not the ones who were yelling out that we have an employee who did something. We were taking care of this matter and explaining that the policies were not being adhered to, and that we have new policies in place. They're more strict, and I think any discussion about personnel matters should be done, outside of the public discussion.
Well, I agree. I mean, I understand the personnel matters side and all that. I just want to make sure we treat everybody fairly.
Well, and to your point though too, and that's a good question, because the department had signed off on that over-the-counter purchase, it's not hard pressed to hold that employee accountable, because in the case of the superintendent, that didn't go to anyone. That was just going right, because at that point it wasn't even being reviewed by the CFO at one point. It was just him signing off on his own reconciliation.
So you're bringing up, it's a good answer. It actually brings up my bigger issue as my financial controls antenna goes off. Number one, so I'm currently working with a company that has 650 employees. We have 22 credit cards, and that includes a sales team. There are way too many credit cards. You don't have an organization that has 20% of your staff having credit cards. It's just not happening. Particularly the organization that I'm talking about is international and with sales reps. This is within a 25-mile radius. That's just a recipe for disaster.
And I agree with you, Tom, and we're looking at that. We're doing a survey on these cards. A lot of these are inactive, not even used.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it was determined whenever it was years ago, who gets cards, who doesn't get cards.
Yeah.
But we are working on that as well, so it's a fair point.
That should be like an easy one.
Agreed.
In 2 weeks, you should be able to say, we've canceled 50 cards. You know, some, like, to your point, Brenda, it could be 98, but there's 60 that are active, and you cancel 40, and you say we get 20.
Right.
Right? That's first thing. The other thing is the commentary on internal audits. There's several issues here. Number one, I've never been with an organization that thinks they have enough resources for internal audit. So you just know that. What's important in your management of internal audit, and what failed here by everybody's own admission, is in 2020 the audit was issued regardless of whether it was detailed enough or in the format that you would like. But for whatever reason, it wasn't acted upon, followed up on, reported on. So what I would see the keys to a properly functioning internal audit function is A, who they report to, B, who directs what audits, and C, what the follow-up on those audits were. Those are the three things as it relates to internal audit. I agree, by the way, with the union rep thing. In my opinion, that just impairs independence and is a conflict of interest. That's just a personal opinion. I also agree with the whole thing about a project manager / internal auditor. You want your internal auditor to be independent. Now, when I was on the Board of Finance, and I think the practice has continued, the Board of Finance gets those internal audit reports. Now, in many instances, and I don't know that I've specifically looked at this one, it'll say at the end of those reports, was this acted up on, was this resolved? I've got a problem if it says it was resolved and then it wasn't, right? And I'm not, I don't know whether there's enough follow-up on there. I don't know what's going on, but these things typically don't just sit in a drawer and get missed. So I would strongly encourage the town to look at making sure that the Board of Finance gets these internal audit reports on a timely basis. By the way, it's that checks and balances. You could argue, and First Select people have for years, that it's not an administrative thing, it's an administrative, but guess what? You want that check of the Board of Finance, because they sign off on the audit opinions. You also want that internal auditor talking with your external auditor to make sure that they're aware, okay? And you might want your external auditor to look at that report to just say, how does this, what are the follow-ups on this? Because to certain things that Nancy said, you want that transparency, you want that independence. So that really comes out in what you were talking about. And the other thing is, I want to be delicate the way I say this because it's not meant, I see this all the time, right? And it's a, forgive me as to not say this delicately, it's a cultural thing that needs to change. You danced around it a lot. Hey, they would sign it, they wouldn't look at it, they would pass it on. They got 1,000 emails, they're doing it, they're passing it on. There's several systems of checks and balances here. There's the department heads, right? There's also your accounting and finance group, right? Now, what typically happens, particularly in an overwhelmed accounting and finance group, is they get so bogged down in their reporting on a day-to-day basis and in churning the transactions that the function of actually reviewing what's being processed or having the teeth to go back and question it is not there, because the department had approved it, it's within budget, move it along because I've got 2,000 other transactions that I'm processing today, right? That's a cultural thing. That's something that actually the administration has to sit back and say, this is the expectation of my finance department, that you're going to fulfill that function. And that wasn't happening here, obviously, because you're saying the justification line wasn't filled out. It should go nowhere if the justification line wasn't filled out. It should stop automatically, do not pass go. That wasn't happening here. And and I'm not trying to besmirch anybody, but that's a systemic series of systematic failures, right, within the process, which is cultural in nature. I didn't know it was my job. The department had signed off on it. That's the way we've always done it. You'll hear that a lot, is what my experience tells me.
And that's a good point, but I also say that I think when I talk to some department heads, you're like, well, we didn't do the justification because we know what those light bulbs are for or whatever. We always buy them, and and I think that gets familiar.
Don't care.
Yeah.
Don't care.
Yeah, exactly. But they're
Right.
just, you know.
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed.
Right, and that's
think,
a problem.
And I think you bring
Yeah.
up a lot of good points,
Yeah.
about, double checking,
Yeah.
the audit, like, and again, I don't want to get into, besmirching anybody, but, the CFO runs the finance department.
Mm-hmm.
And those audits are all reviewed by the CFO. So these old audits, and even the audit was not, not checked off on to make sure that things were followed up with. And so, again, you make a lot of very good points. I think they're very helpful. I do think that the internal auditor should work with the town's outside auditor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, listen, the outside auditor, while I respect his ability to do audits, it seems like the guy's underwater pretty good. He's hard to get a hold of. Takes a long time for him to respond. I guess there's not that many external auditors in the state of Connecticut anymore, for whatever reason.
My apologies.
So, yeah, I think there's, listen, I think as we've chunked along here, throughout this, last 4 years on all these broken policies and issues that were wrong, I think we learned, a lot from this, that has been extraordinarily helpful. I love the fact that we added this additional person to the finance department, something we've been wanting to do for some time. So you're making some very good points, and I appreciate them.
No, thank you. I do think your Board of Finance has a role to play relative to your internal auditors, and they can be that independent arbiter with the auditors to help direct what areas they should look at, to help be the go-between between them and the external auditors, and to also review the findings and come back and say, hey, what's been done about this, so that they can be comfortable with the financial statements.
Agreed, but
To that point, Tom.
1 minute, Nancy, that audit that was done in February of 20 was given to the
That's what I want to know, what happened with that.
No one called me to say, hey, look at this thing, or what's going on with it.
Again, I don't know whether it was represented to the Board of Finance and it was taken care of. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I see
I
the chairperson, a couple more minutes if I might, and then.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, Tom, that because I see Lori Charlton, who is on the Board of Finance, raising her hand, I just want to make sure that the meeting isn't shut before we have a chance to hear from her, given what you've just said.
Go ahead.
The other thing I'll say, just directly to your report, I think a few things on your report. I do think the report should rightfully go before a meeting of either the Board of Finance or to the Audit Committee. Their call. The second thing is, as an auditor, I understand what you were trying to do with the report. It was 1,000 pages. I know that's the transparency thing, and here's all the emails, and here all that. I get it. You're a lawyer. You're building a case. Here's everything that was done. What I didn't see enough of, you reached a conclusion based on all the work that you did. I can't judge that work. Like, I haven't seen enough to say, I agree with the conclusion, right? It's just not in the report. So, you know, in your discussion, it's, hey, I looked at all Mr. Bodie's stuff, this is what I found. We looked at the other stuff, and we didn't find as much. Well, what does that mean to me, right, to support your conclusion? My suspicion is that's what either the audit committee or the Board of Finance is going to want to see is, you know, here's the background, here's all the testing that we did, right? Here's the conclusion that we reached, here's the amount that's in way, and here's the recommended actions, which I saw that you had. The thing I didn't see in the recommended actions was my commentary regarding empowering and expecting the accounting department to be the watchdog on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that I agree with you that it could have meeting it. I want to say I don't have any pride of authorship at this moment with the amount of time frames to try to get the work. And I will also say I'm not a trained auditor. I was looking more for policy violations, but your point is well taken, and it's probably work that needs a little bit more information. Right? Yeah.
How did you reach that conclusion, right? I think Nancy asked the question, right? How did you look at it? How did you pick what you looked at? You can't look at everything, so what did you look at and why? Those are the type things.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I'll open it up. And so I just, for the public's edification, I did invite the entire Board of Finance has several subcommittees that they have that work on various things, and they have an audit subcommittee. Mr. Mottola is the chairperson. He was away, though, on vacation, so I had invited the members to come on to participate in this, and I know they're going to also, we're working to schedule a joint a meeting where our purchasing director, who is involved in this, has a function in these roles, in these matters, as well as the CFO and the HR director, to present this to them and have an open discussion regarding the findings and ways we can implement some additional controls to make sure that we're running things appropriately. So that's what I just want to explain to anybody listening. Lori, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. And I know we're running short on time. I actually have many questions. I know we'll have another meeting, but I just want to make a couple of important points because I think these are systemic issues that go beyond credit cards. And Ms. Simpson, you know, you focused a lot on people didn't know policies, people didn't get training, et cetera, et cetera. But I think from my perspective, the biggest issue that I saw was, and it was in this February 2020 internal audit report, the very first finding in that audit report says an independent person does not review employee credit card expenditures. So we can have policies and we can have training and we can have all of those things and we can remind people. But if we don't have that most fundamental financial control, we've got nothing. And that was the first finding in this report. The last finding, there were 14 findings, was that consequences for violating the town credit card policy are not enforced. Now, among all the findings in this report, if you go to the back, what was represented to us was that all these things were either fixed or being fixed. So that was our understanding. And I think, and the reason I want to point that out is because, you know, you characterize this report as broad and maybe high level. Reading that first finding is extremely alarming because we don't spend that much on credit cards, but we spend tens of millions on other things. And if we have bills being paid and money going out the door without people doing a review, and I know it's happening in other areas because there have been other recent audit reports, that is a very big issue. So regardless of training and policies and everything else, that has to happen. So I would say that. So that was raised. We were told it was going to be fixed. It wasn't fixed. And so, you know, someone else may have raised the point. That raises to me concerns that this is going on sort of throughout our expenditures, and it's not just limited to credit cards. So I did want to say that. The other thing, I just want to follow up on Mr. Flynn's comments in terms of getting a level of comfort on how you came to your conclusions, because, you know, I did go through all the emails, and that's what most of the documentation was. And, you know, I know there's only so much you can do after the fact, but, you know, I saw questions and answers on the charges, and, you know, I saw you asked about a seminar someone went to, and they said it was a business conference on aromatherapy. Not sure why that was considered a legitimate expense. Numerous, Sirius Radio, the response was, this was approved by my supervisor. Numerous food and Home Depot charges. Explanations were like, we had an official function. So, you know, for me, I understand you went through the process. I understand you were asking people about things after the fact. But I would say it'd be pretty hard to conclude that there was no fraud here. I think, I'm not saying it was material, but I do think that in many cases, the conclusion would be that we just don't know because there wasn't contemporaneous documentation. So, you know, all of this, I think, had we had that base, even if there wasn't a clear policy, even if employees hadn't been trained, if someone in finance had been reviewing these, they would have been caught contemporaneously, and these could have been fixed, and that could have gone a long way into providing training to employees. So I would follow up on Mr. Flynn said, and I think it's really important, and maybe we can do this when you report to the audit committee or Board of Finance. We need a summary of the scope of the audit, how much you tested, what you decided to look at. As far as I know, one of the largest departments that spends on credit card is IT. I didn't see anything in there about IT. I really didn't see an examination of Parks and Recs, who also spends a lot, or DPW. So, you know, I appreciate all the backup emails, but I think what we really need, just in order for the boards and the public to have confidence in the conclusions you've drawn, is to actually see the scope of your work and the basis for your findings. And, you know, again, I can send you some more questions in detail, but the reason, just to sum it up, the reason I wanted to point out this internal audit report and the words that are with it is that there are more internal audit reports like this. And if somebody's reading these without recognizing what that means and how risky this is, then we have a serious systemic problem. That's my opinion. And we do have more audit reports that have very similar conclusions. We just heard one a couple of months ago. So, you know, where we had a contract that expired, the vendor jacked up prices, and we paid those higher prices for 3 years without anybody noticing. So, you know, these are the types of things that I think the appropriate controls in finance are supposed to be catching and need to catch. And, you know, I think it's a fine idea to copy more people on these internal audit reports, but ultimately, if the auditor reports to the CFO, it's the CFO's job to make sure the right people know if a significant issue has been raised. And I don't think that's happening even now. So I'll just leave it at that. And glad to provide more detail before our next meeting on my questions.
No, thank you, Lori, and I appreciate the feedback. And again, we welcome all of the advice and feedback. I know you have experience in this from your former private job, and as well as Mr. Flynn's, and we welcome it. We have been trying from day one to clean up tremendous problems, tremendous, and this isn't something you're going to read in my weekly newsletter, because I'm not going to talk about all the unbelievable, you know, just unbelievable lack of oversight and things that were going on. But I welcome this. We want to hear this. We want to know about it. I look forward to our joint meeting, having the discussion about this audit, and hope we can expand on that conversation together, because we want to do those things. We want to put in more professional controls in all of our departments. We've been working on it, modernizing so many of our departments. A lot of turnover, obviously, with the staff, you know, between the, you know, high-level people being arrested and charged, and then, you know, obviously turnover, and then modernizing a lot of these departments. Things have changed, but I think it's, you know, I welcome it, and I look forward to working with you on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, listen, we are at 5:45. Like I did say earlier, I welcome the opportunity to continue the discussion at the Board of Selectmen table. We are working to schedule a meeting with the Board of Finance Audit Subcommittee, with myself, with Kathleen Simpson, as well as with Adam and Jared, our CFO. And I look forward to scheduling that. And I would welcome, Tom and Nancy to attend, if you're able to, because I think that would be beneficial as well.
Let me know when it's scheduled.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. We do have a couple other things. Whoops. Whoops, I've got other stuff. I apologize. Can I get a motion to consider and act upon the tax refund as recommended by the tax collector in the amount of $34,783.35?
So moved. I'll second.
Is there any discussion from the public on this item? Back to the board, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thanks so much, Ann. Let's see. I just want to quickly mention that today is National Purple Heart Day, and we are a Purple Heart town, as many of you probably know. We have a large, highly decorated veteran population, including Purple Heart recipients in our town, and I think just want to say I really admire and honor them. And if there's no other discussion,
I got one more point that I'll get shot if I go home and don't say it.
I know you didn't say.
My son is a captain of the Fairfield High School, one of the captains of Fairfield High School hockey team. That team is voted to forego their summer fundraiser to benefit the team and actually take those funds that they would have kept to help defray some of their parents' costs and give all of the proceeds of a cornhole tournament to Operation Hope. So they've currently raised about $2,500. They'd like to raise a bit more. Their tournament is Saturday morning at 10 a.m. at Jennings Beach. Anybody is welcome. It's $50 a team. So two people, $50. All of it goes to Operation Hope. There's trophies, and they partnered with Country Cow, and you get a gift basket from Country Cow for this as well. And if you know Kathy at Country Cow, she does not skimp on her gift basket.
No, she's the best. Well, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
And kudos to your son and his team for stepping up to make a difference in the community.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no further discussion or business, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.